Welcome to Grace for Dyslexia. Today we address narrative reasoning. This is podcast number 11. Carissa is 13 years old with a freckled face and brown hair and green eyes. She has an ear for stories from the time that she was very young. She always paid attention to a good story. She loved being read to, watching a movie or TV show. The stories she loved the most are the ones that had a moral or lesson. She finds solace in these types of stories. They seem to provide guidance for how she led her life. As Carissa grew older, she developed her own stories. She told them to her friends and family. Carissa did not get stories from reading, as this was too difficult due to her dyslexia. She could not make sense of another's story or its lesson through reading. In her stories, she tried to teach a lesson, but it did not always go as planned. As stories with a moral go, they require experience by the author. Carissa had to grow in her experience, to grow in her storytelling. This was a constant effort for her as she worked through school. Carissa began writing her stories down, changing and rewriting as time went by. She added new stories as moral lessons were learned or highlighted. She felt a spiritual need to relate her stories. Carissa did little with her stories for many years as she had no outlet for them. She had a large collection of stories by the time she got married. She soon became a mother and realized as she held her child that her stories had a place, a use, a purpose. Carissa could not share all those wonderful children's stories from books, but her child had the benefit of all her stories she shared orally. As a mother, Carissa carefully selected the stories she shared with her child based on lesson and the child's age. Carissa even went to rewriting some of them so she could reteach the lesson to her child at another time with a different story. She found that these provided a means to show her child the ways of life. It also showed Carissa her continued spiritual path through storytelling. Carissa's favorite story goes like this. Quote, "Once upon a time there was a little girl who was shy and fearful of others. She kept to herself and hardly spoke to anyone. Her blonde hair and blue eyes were very attractive. Her name was Jenna, and she was 10 years old. Jenna liked to play with her dolls and with her friends. She also liked to read books and enjoyed stories which had happy endings. Jenna always felt like everyone should get along and disliked conflict. At school one day, some boys decided to pick on Jenna. They were teasing her about her being so quiet, making it into something bad. Jenna felt terrible and was very hurt, but she also knew the boys were wrong in saying the things they did about her. After some time, Jenna had had enough of the boys' torment. She went over to them and looked them in the eye. She shared the following tale about the runt of a puppy litter who was the last to feed, the last to find a warm place to sleep, and the last to be picked for a forever home. How do you think this poor puppy felt when her brothers and sisters would not accept her into the world? This poor puppy could not stand up for itself or to demand others love her. She was helpless. The boys just looked at each other and then at her and laughed. They did not understand Jenna's tale at all. They made no connection to her plight with their teasing. Jenna was now more than angry with the boys' cluelessness. She said, "I accept who you are even though you are being mean to me. Why is it that you cannot accept me for who I am?" At first, the boys just smiled again as if to say they didn't care. Then, as she continued to wait for an answer, they got quieter and more thoughtful. Finally, one boy said, "Can't you take a joke?" Jenna did not smile. She kept a straight face and said, "I find making fun of others as not funny at all." Another boy said, "Why are you so quiet? You hardly talk to anyone." "My shyness is none of your concern. I don't go around making fun of how you look or play ball," replied Jenna. The boys looked at each other. Then the third one said, "We are sorry, Jenna. We won't tease you any longer." Jenna smiled slightly. Then she said, "I appreciate that, boys, but I want you to accept everyone for who they are no matter what. Don't you think you could just allow people to be themselves without being teased?" The boys were a little shocked, then nodded in reply, yes. Jenna turned to walk away and then turned back to face the boys. She said, "We are all different from one another, and none is better than the other." Unquote. Years later, Carissa's daughter Jade was visiting, and her mother's stories came up. Jade said, "Mom, your stories have been such a great support for me through life. I think you should publish them for others to read." Carissa was humbled by her daughter's comment. She said, "Jade, I never really thought they were good enough to be shared. I really wrote them for myself and eventually shared them with you." "But Mom, they have such wonderful moral value that is missing in our world today. I really think there is a place for such wisdom," explained Jade. "You really think so? I had never considered the possibility," Carissa said shyly. "Mom, I know you are hesitant to put your stories out there. I can help you get them published. Would you be willing to explore this with me?" Jade said impatiently. Carissa agreed to go ahead with publishing her stories with Jade. 2 years later, her stories were in book form and selling well. Carissa is so thankful for her daughter and for the blessings of her Lord who graced her with the storytelling in the first place. Inspired by Mark, chapter 4, verse 2a. He taught them many things by parables. Many dyslexics are storytellers and love to read and listen to and perform good stories. What lessons could you teach through storytelling? Grace for Dyslexia is a podcast dedicated to Christian encouragement for children and adults who have or are struggling with dyslexia. All stories in Grace for Dyslexia are fiction. Names, characters, places, and events are the product of the author's imagination. Any similarities to actual events, locales, or persons living or dead is coincidental.